My uncle tried to absolutely humiliate me in front of the entire church congregation, and I didn't even do anything wrong. All I'm trying to do is help my father's business stay afloat. Since he's passed away, it's been going downhill, and I'm the only one who can save it. And well, my uncle thinks that he plays a part in this somehow, so this is what I do to the entire church. If I should wake up in the middle of the night with a machete and find my Uncle Peterson in front of me with a Bible in his hand and a snake beside me about to strike me, I would first off kill my uncle before going ahead to deal with the snake. This is my personal belief born out of experience, and I say it to make you understand my uncle is more dangerous than the deadliest of all creatures. My uncle is the only brother my late father had, and he was the younger one. My father was some years ahead of him, and during their early years, Uncle Pete, as he's called, used to live a very riotous life. My father, who was in his early 20s, had gotten married, while my uncle was in his teens, did not have sense of responsibility. My uncle was 19 years old when a lady got pregnant from him. She gave birth to my cousin Theodore, and I left him on my uncle's doorstep. She never showed up to date. My parents gave birth to me 3 years later, and my uncle soon found purpose in religion. The whole thing helped put him under control and quickly become recognized and respected among the religious folk here in town. He never married, though. Theodore turned out to be the same, if not worse, representation of his father when his father was young and wild. I believe my uncle knew about it, but he turned a blind eye to his son's dirty lifestyle like it never even existed. My uncle was a civil servant, and he did not earn much. My father, on the other hand, had a thriving eatery business, and he would sometimes financially support Theodore's academics. Theodore graduated, and Uncle Pete spoke to my father about giving him a job at his workplace. My father did not think much about it, and being somebody who looked out for family, he quickly gave Theodore the job without even a second thought. It did not take my dad up to 2 weeks to discover that he had made a grave mistake in bringing my cousin Theodore to come work in the family business. Theodore did not take the job seriously. He would not work and stop the girls who worked there from doing so as he constantly flirted with them. My parents discussed it, and my mother advised my dad to speak to his brother about Theodore's attitude before he would, tread the same path his father had taken during his teenage years, a path that produced a child without a mom. My father spoke with Uncle Pete, and though my uncle expressed surprise and disgust at the attitude, he told my father to take Theodore like his own son. This was an indirect way of saying my father should look the other way. This was something my father would never even do for me. My father condoned Theodore's excuse and his excesses for a while, till Theodore went to the extreme. He stole a huge sum of money from my father's business, and my father was mad when he discovered who was behind the theft. He immediately had my cousin arrested and had him detained at the police station and threatened to prosecute him to the full extent that the law would permit if he did not produce the money. Theodore, of course, could not produce the money. He had stolen it, and he wasted everything down to the last dime. Uncle Pete heard about his son's arrest from the gossip that was circling the church. Though it was embarrassing, more embarrassing was the fact that it was his brother who got his son arrested. Uncle Pete immediately confronted my father and demanded to know why my father had gotten his nephew arrested. My father, who was angry at the way his brother had ignored his son's lifestyle, simply responded by saying that he had arrested Theodore because he was a thief, and thieves are to be arrested. He did not just condemn my father's actions, but he was equally against the fact that my father did not inform him before getting his son arrested. He maintained the fact that it was a family affair, and that was why it was wrong to deal with it like it was someone unrelated. My father just kept himself from pouring out the words that weighed heavy on his mind. If he had informed my uncle about Theodore's theft, my uncle would have simply pressured him into overlooking the case. Uncle Pete went ahead to tell my dad to let go of the matter and have his son brought out from jail, just to avoid further embarrassment which he had caused, especially within the church. Well, my father told my uncle that he was not going to have Theodore released until his money was repaid in full. Uncle Pete had to pay the money, and my father took it without giving it a second thought. He expected to fire Theodore from his business, and my uncle, who knew that the church was aware of the matter and was looking out to see how he would respond to it, came before the whole congregation and condemned his son's lifestyle. You see, hypocrisy. What he did not do in private, he was now doing in public. Uncle Pete went ahead to thank my father for not handling the matter with a kid's glove and noted that the evil should always be dealt with no matter who was involved. The words of Uncle Pete further brought him respect in the eye of the church. He was seen as one who would not condone evil no matter who was involved. Despite all of that, I knew the things my uncle said about my dad did not come from his heart, and I was certain that he probably had some form of grudge against my dad and all of us even. This was something that, time would probably prove. Uncle Pete did not see eye to eye with Dad after the despite of singing his praise publicly. He soon went ahead to get engaged to a rich young lady whose families were members of the church. I did not see similarity between the lady and my uncle. Why a rich lady in her 30s, who do not seem religious to me, would want to marry my uncle, who was in his early 40s. It just did not make sense to me, except for the possibility that my uncle must have used his position and influence to win her over. Yeah, I forgot to mention the fact that my uncle is a fine motivational orator. It just became general knowledge that my uncle and this rich lady called Bernice wanted to get married. They had not been formally engaged, but you know, the way gossip works. It was around this time that my father passed on. We were all saddened by the news, but my uncle seemed devastated the most. More sympathy from the church was directed towards him, and than my mother and I even received. The funny part was that though my uncle claimed to be heartbroken about the death of his brother amid everyone, he never paid my mother and me condolence or a visit. He made a speech during my father's funeral about how my dad was irreplaceable and how he equally committed to seeing that my father's legacy did not die. My father was laid to rest and I had to step in to manage his business as my grieving mother could not do so. I had no prior manager skills, but I think I did pretty well at the start. Things did not continue well though. The business soon began to dwindle and I decided to seek my uncle's financial help. I know he was a civil servant who did not earn well, but he had committed to preserving my father's legacy beside. He spent more money than he earned, and I suspect that it was his wife-to-be who was behind it. I informed my uncle of my desire to come see him, and he specifically demanded that I come on a very particular day. So, I got to my uncle's house, and his would-be wife Bernice was there. I thanked my uncle for his commitment at my father's funeral, and I then went ahead to tell him about how my late father's business was struggling to stand on its feet ever since his demise. I informed him that I had come to solicit funds that would be used to making some business moves. I promised to repay the money before the year ran out. My uncle, after listening to me, goes pause for a while. I was expecting a yes or a no from him, but I got an insult instead. He starts by quoting the Bible that said something about a good man leaving an inheritance for his children. Uncle Pete said my late father was never fully committed to follow the Bible, and proof of that was in fact that he left me a burden as an inheritance. He went ahead just to talk down on my father, and I just kept quiet because I felt that he would give me money at the end of the day. Uncle Pete finally called my attention to the fact that he was preparing to get married and could not throw money around or things of lesser importance. He then suggested that I sell the business, as he could not see any hopes for it to survive. This was someone who had talked about preserving his late brother's legacy. I was about to thank him and his fiancée so I could take my leave, but my uncle was simply not done humiliating me. He asked me to sit up and do something useful with my life. What was I doing before? He even suggested that I see his son Theodore as an example. According to him, Theodore's begun putting his life to good use, even though my father had fired him. My uncle rounded up his statement by saying, don't let your present situation determine your future, kid. This was his pattern, masking wickedness under religion and motivation, and I thanked both him and his fiancée, who observed all that was going on with seriousness. I took my leave, feeling worse than I ever expected. My uncle just used my situation to humiliate my father and me and just peddle himself in front of his fiancée as someone intelligent. The coming days saw me feeling depressed as I had no idea what to do to sustain my father's business. My mother suggested that I collect a loan and use our house or the eatery as collateral, but I know how these loan people operate, so I disregarded the idea. I was in the business place one day and, when I received an unexpected visitor. It was my uncle's fiancée, Bernice. I warmly received her, and she noted that she had come to see me as a result of my discussion with my uncle the other day. I felt my uncle had sent her, so I replied by saying, my uncle could have just asked me to come over to the house, but she noted she was there for her own accord, and my uncle knew nothing about it, something she wanted. Well, I get curious about learning why she was there, and Bernice asked if I had gotten a way to salvage the situation, and I explained to her that I had no idea what to do. She asked what plans I had for the business, assuming that there was money, and I told her the plans which I had in mind. Bernice commended me, but then she began to make very intelligent suggestions, and I knew at once that she was no child in business management. She talked about rebranding the business and creating some complementary things alongside it. Her suggestion was nice, but of course there was no money. Bernice asked what I felt about adding a nightclub, a chalet, and an event hall to my father's eatery. It was a great idea with the potential to haul in massive profits because it would offer folks different avenues to spend their money. I praised her suggestion and promised to do so if I had the means. Bernice asked if I did not consider the implication it would have in the way the church folks viewed me, and I got candid with her. I told her that though I was brought up in the church, I'm not a religious fanatic, and I don't buy into certain kinds of ideology. The business idea seemed great, and I would invest in it if I had the means. Bernice went ahead to tell me that she had a nightclub that had all sorts of things and an event hall, and she suggested a merger of my father's eatery and the club, with me managing it all. We would be co-partners, and I was surprised that my uncle's fiancée would own a nightclub, and it was the only business that she had, but you know what? It made sense. Her questions were a means to see if I was the right person to partner with. She noted that her nightclub was suffering decline, and she believed a merger would do both businesses good. So I asked why she had not considered bringing her would-be stepson, Theodore, to manage the business, as my uncle had claimed he was doing well in the business place where he worked. But Bernice told me that she would not make the mistake of handing her business over to a never-do-well like Theodore. She was the one who had given him a job, and she could tell how unserious about stuff he was. She was only ignoring him because of her relationship with his dad, and according to her, if not for the fact that her parents, who were members of the same church my father attended, had been on her neck to consider the advances of my father, whom they perceived as the perfect suitor, she would not have anything to do with him or Theodore. Although I did not believe or even think Bernice was making the right decision by getting married to my uncle just to get her family members off her neck, I kept my opinion to myself, as a merger was a nice opportunity to save my father's business, and besides, it's whomever she got married to was no business of mine. We reached an argument and we could be co-partners, but I would be publicly projected as the owner of the firm. I was not to disclose our agreement to anybody within the religious circle, and I was okay with that. Everything was put in place and the merger was done. The business was rebranded, and there were lots of promotional campaigns to see that we won the interest of the public. Bernice and my uncle soon had their engagement party, and it was called an engagement party, but it was boring as hell. It was just another gathering of the church folks to do some more religious activities. Bernice got my uncle a car, and is it not supposed to be the other way around? I knew the wedding bells would be ringing soon, and I saw it as a window of opportunity to make some money for the business, so I decided I would talk to my uncle and inform him about the new shape of my father's business, before suggesting that the wedding reception be done at the event hall, which the business owned. I approached my uncle and told him how my father's business was now thriving as a result of the things I had added to it. I then went ahead to make my suggestion known to him. My uncle listened with attention, and when I was done, he promised to get back to me with a reply soon enough. My uncle's reply came this afternoon in a manner which I never ever expected. It was in the church, and he was thanking them for how they had shown up to his engagement party. He noted that the good things he was enjoying, the car especially, were simply what the Bible meant when it says, "He who finds a wife finds a good thing." My uncle then announced the wedding date to the church and the whole place erupted with applause. Uncle Pete was not done though. He went ahead to tell the church that though I've been mounting pressure on him to host the wedding reception at the nightclub that I recently opened, the reception would be taking place elsewhere because a nightclub is not a place fit for a Christian, a fact that he had expected that I would have known. The whole church gasped the moment he mentioned me opening a nightclub, and they looked in my direction like the devil was seated in their midst. I wished at that point that the ground would open up and just swallow me whole. Well, the earth did not swallow me whole, and I could not sit there, so I stood up and walked out of the church, while leaving my mother to take on the heat which I was sure would be thrown in her direction. Do you know why she had, earlier claimed my uncle is worse than a snake? He had listened to the suggestion which I made, and his only concern was about me adding a nightclub to my father's business. It would be seen as great if he had declined my request, right there on the spot, but he waited to do it in front of the whole church so he could humiliate me. My mom is still at the church, and I know that she'll be upset with me, though I would apologize to her for keeping her in the dark. I would not apologize for any move that I've made, though. Update number 1. My mother came back home and she simply wanted to confirm what was said in the church. I told her that my father's business indeed had a nightclub, but before I could say more, she began crying, while saying that I've humiliated and soiled her name in the presence of the whole church. She noted that this was something my father would have never done if he was alive, but I told her that my father had let what his religious folks would think about him stop him from making a smart business move that would ensure the business did not suffer a setback after his demise. I apologized to my mother for keeping her in the dark and letting her find out about it in church, but I did explain to her that I never asked my uncle to take the church folks into the night for his wedding reception. I told her that my uncle had presented the whole thing differently, just so that he can humiliate us in front of everyone. I noted that we were not done dealing with the matter, but she needed to address my uncle for a lie that he told in church. My mother calls a family meeting, and she challenged my uncle for lying about the nightclub thing, when I only suggested that he use my event hall for his wedding. My uncle noted that a nightclub was an immoral business to own, and he had done the right thing by bringing it to the knowledge of the congregation, something which my father had done when his son Theodore was living wild. The humiliation which my uncle calls me was payback for what my father had done. My mother noted that Uncle Pete was wrong to have lied about me suggesting the wedding venue be made into the nightclub, when I had merely suggested the event gets catered, but my uncle claimed what he said was true. It was his word against mine, I guess you would say, so there was nothing that my mother could do. My mother and I stood up to take our leave, and that's when Uncle Pete offered what he claimed was godly advice to my mom. He said that rather than encourage my immoral lifestyle, my mother should encourage me to apologize to the church, and that would perhaps be lenient about suspending me from the assembly. Who cares? My mother and I left my uncle's home and got home, and my uncle's words began to take their toll on her, to the point that she even suggested I do what my uncle said. I would rather die than offer an apology. An apology meant that I was going to shut down the nightclub business, and otherwise the church would not view my repentance as genuine. Well, you know what? I truly don't give a duck. Where was the church when my father's business was crumbling? Did any of them come to my aid? I would quickly turn my back on the church rather than a thriving business which has been beneficial to me more than the church has ever been. My mother is well aware of my stance, and though she's not happy, there's nothing that she can do about it. I forgot to mention that she's still in the dark about the fact that my uncle's fiancée is in the league with me. Update number 2. My mother has not had it easy with me. She refused to talk to me till I offered the church an apology, and the church had immediately suspended me after my uncle's allegations, and my mother was seen as a failed parent. I've made up my mind to leave the church for good, and know my mother would not be mad at me forever. I mean, I am the only person she has left in this world. I was pained at what my uncle has done, and I knew his suggestion that I apologize to the church was so I would give up the business and it would crumble. He was still jealous of my father's legacy. The suspension duration was 2 weeks, and the church council called me to find out if I was remorseful for what I've done. I informed them that I was, and they expectedly demanded that I give an apology to the church and inform the congregation that I was going to do away with the business. Once I had met the 2 conditions, I would then be allowed to fellowship with them again. I informed them that I was willing to do what they had requested. The day came and my uncle, who was among the council that had met, was seated in the church waiting to hear me beg for forgiveness for starting up a venture that paraded immorality and possibly thank him for making me realize my wrongdoing. Bernice was not in church that day, and it was a good thing because I was not going to offer an apology. No, I was going to blow our cover. The time came and I was called in front of the church and handed the microphone. I looked around to make sure that every eye was fixed on me before I proceeded to say what I wanted to say. I started by telling them that I had been suspended from the church for opening up a business that was perceived to be immoral, but the church had been very partial in its judgment. My statement sent a jolt of surprise to the folks seated there, and I told them that they had ignored a major accomplice in all of this, and I pointed towards my uncle. Uncle Pete looked seriously confused, and people looked towards his direction. I then told the church that the business was co-owned by me and my uncle's fiancée, and rather than make inquiries as to her source of income, he was busy spending her money, which she got from the business, while claiming the Bible verse about him finding a wife and finding a good thing was playing out in his life. I made sure to paint my uncle as one who was blinded by greed to question his would-be wife's source of wealth. My uncle called me a liar as I spoke, but I dropped the microphone and walked out, leaving the whole place in a pandemonium. This happened yesterday, and I'm sure the council would meet again on behalf of my uncle. Update number 3. I was discussing with my mother this afternoon about my confession to the church when Bernice stormed out of her home ready to pull it down. She wanted to tear me to shreds as my statement to the church had put her in a difficult position with her family. She made me understand that the reason she was not yet suing me was because she had made the mistake of not insisting we signed a non-disclosure agreement, which would ensure my silence. She, however, insisted that I was going to make right on what I've done. I apologized to Bernice for what I said and did, and I knew I was in the wrong, and I attributed this to anger that I felt towards her fiancé, who was my uncle. I told her to look on the bright side of things. She could use this to end the relationship with my uncle, as a marriage to him was a bad idea. Bernice said that I was not in any position to give her advice, and she only needed me to continue and come before the church and recant what I said. She threatened to make things difficult for our business if I did not do what she was demanding. I knew how much the merger had benefited me and my late father's business, and we'd probably be out of business if not for Bernice, so I was forced to accept what she was saying. Bernice stormed out of her home while stating that she was waiting for me to make good on my word this time around. From the little I know about her, Bernice does not come across to me as a lady who would toss aside however you like, but I guess her loyalty and respect to her family, especially her parents, was the reason why she was willing to stay with someone like my uncle, even if it meant that she hid who she was. My mother informed me that my uncle was being queried by the church council, and if it was discovered that he had been hypocritical in the slightest manner, he would be stripped of his leadership position in the church, and the humiliation would be massive. Well, this was something that she wanted, and she asked that I not give in to Bernice's demands. She noted that if Bernice should decide to split from me, I could obtain a loan and use our home as collateral. This is how badly my mother wants to see my uncle humiliated. I want the same thing too, but it was not a wise decision. I think I would recant my statement and inform the church that I've slandered my uncle and his would-be wife. Update number 4. I never saw this update coming, and neither did you. I had already settled in with me that I was going to stand before the church to recant my earlier statement, but thanks to my Uncle Pete, he was further embarrassed at the end of the day. Uncle Pete knew that the whole congregation was eager to know the truth of the issue and how he was handling it, so when I told the pastor that I wanted to take back the things I had said and face the punishment for slandering my uncle, Uncle Pete sought permission to address the congregation first. Uncle Pete was allowed to speak first, and I knew he would just make a mess of me. Everyone was present. My mother, the extended family, Bernice and her family, I mean everyone. Uncle Pete began reminding the church of his history of blamelessness. He said that every great man always has those who antagonize the greatness within them. I was the antagonist, I guess. But they never deterred by the short-sightedness of those who were haters of good. He claimed that he did not have the faintest idea about why I hated him so much, but I just noted I would always have his forgiveness. The congregation nodded their heads. It was like he was bringing them under his spell again, and my heart dampened from the impending defeat which I was already suffering at the hands of my uncle. My uncle, however, ruined his chance to defeat us, as he proceeded to talk about Bernice. He noted to the church that his personal belief in morality came even before his fiancée, and that he would waste no time to, quote, throw her under the bus if he discovered that she was indulging in anything immoral. Everyone was pleased with my uncle, and he was like their living saint. I was about to apologize for painting their saint in a bad light when Bernice stood up and insisted she spoke. She had seen the way he projected himself, and she heard the things that he had said. They were all repulsive to her, and she was now the one who opened my uncle's can of worms. She admitted to the whole church that everything I said was true. She said to the dismay of everyone present that she was in certain businesses which was not acceptable to them, and you know what? She doesn't care. Bernice said her only regret is hiding her true self from her family and wasting her time bearing my uncle's disgusting hypocrisy. She brought to their knowledge that Theodore, who was their saint's son, worked in one of the nightclubs which he owned. She said my uncle was well aware that his son worked in a nightclub and lived an immoral lifestyle, but he looked the other way. After bringing my Uncle Pete's hypocrisy to light, she finally told them that the only reason I had come to recant the things I earlier said was because she had mounted pressure on me to do so, but did not see any need for it as she was done playing religion. Bernice walked out of the church, called off the wedding to my uncle, and took back the car that she gifted him. My uncle was stripped of his title, and he has quit attending the church as a result to shame. If I had not exposed my arrangement with Bernice, she would not have taken the bold step to call it quits. Our business, by the way, is booming. I just think it's hilarious that the uncle was stood up to by Bernice, who was basically hiding her entire lifestyle from the church. And you know what? Bernice, I think she got the last laugh, because the last time we checked, the uncle was stripped of his title, and he wasn't even allowed back in church because of the shame that it brought to him. I do want to know what you guys think about that story. What do you think about the entire role that OP played in this? Let's just talk about it down below in the comment section, guys. My name's Mr. Reddito, and I narrate stories like this every day. So, if you want to be a part of these day-to-day stories, all you have to do is subscribe to the channel, hit that bell notification icon so YouTube will tell you whenever a story is live, and I hope you guys have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, and of course remember, it's cool to be kind. See ya.